I've seen a couple different things, all of them confirmed by other witnesses. But the most interesting one happened while I was camping in British Columbia at a place called Sugar Lake. I was probably 13 at the time, and it was pretty late, about midnight, and I was with my older cousins who had just started drinking and stolen a couple beers for themselves. The three of us were just talking shit and staring at the stars like teenagers do, and I noticed what I thought to be the slowest shooting star I have ever seen. Had the classic long tail behind it, and as I was pointing it out, it decided to stop for a second and then proceed to do figure eights, U-turns, and maneuvers across the sky for about 5 minutes, and then took off at extreme speed over the horizon. So after that, me and my cousins were talking about it to try to figure out what it could be, and obviously we were convinced it was a UFO, and while we were talking about what it could be, it came back and did some more maneuvers like before. It was at that point that I noped out of there, never been so terrified to sleep in a tent in my life. Now that I'm an adult, I happen to be an aircraft mechanic, and I know for a fact that no conventional aircraft can perform maneuvers like what I saw that night, both the stops and tight turns and the hypersonic acceleration with no sonic boom. Also, the normal aircraft would not give off light or leave a glowing trail behind it. When I was little, my family owned a cabin on a lake in rural Appalachia. It was pretty remote at the time, though it's been more heavily developed over the past 10 years. Anyways, when we would go to the cabin, we would often go for picnics in a huge field at the edge of a farmer's field. One day we set up our picnic spot at the edge of a very steep hill. At the bottom of the hill, the field met the tree line of a very large forest. I was too young to remember everything that happened, but this is what I was told by my sister and my parents. We were sitting on the field eating when my dad heard really loud banging coming from the bottom of the hill where the tree line met the field. He walked to the crest of the hill and saw an enormous white creature standing on 2 feet and taking large logs and throwing them over its head to bang it off of tree trunks to make the loud noise. He showed my mom, she saw it, and we decided to pack up and leave. They were creeped out. Now, my parents are very sane and rational people, so they never really talked about it, out of fear of sounding insane. No one really wants to claim they saw a Bigfoot. Well, about 4 years ago, we were having Christmas with my aunt and her family, who would also frequent a cabin on the same lake. We ended up talking about the cabin, and were sharing memories when my aunt said she had an absolutely unbelievable story that she had never shared with anyone besides my uncle. She would always make wild blackberry jam in the fall, so she would often go picking for blackberries. One day she said she thought she saw a bear in the distance eating blackberries and that it scared the hell out of her, but she continued to pick and watched it in the distance for a while. Well, eventually the thing she thought was a bear stood up, revealed its white coat of hair, and walked away on 2 feet into the woods. Obviously, we immediately shared our story, and everyone was in awe that we had seen the same thing at approximately the same time, the late 1980s. I decided to do a little research, and it turns out there were a ton of sightings of this thing in the late 80s, and someone was actually so convinced that what he saw was a Bigfoot that he dedicated the rest of his life to finding it again. You can look it up. There are numerous reports of people seeing this thing around the time my family saw it. I'm not sure I really believe that this guy found the Bigfoot again, but he claims he found 3 of them together. 2 big and brown, and 1 with thick white fur, an exact description of what my parents and aunt independently confirmed. I don't really know what to think. The rational part of me knows it probably wasn't Bigfoot, but I respect everyone in my family's sanity and intellect, and everyone was convinced that what they saw was not a bear and was covered in thick white fur and walked on 2 legs. I don't know how you can explain that away. So, I was walking in a parking lot with my dad one night and did my usual look to the stars and saw something directly overhead. By its speed, I at first thought it was a meteor, but quickly realized it wasn't quite that fast, but it was still faster than any satellite. It was an orange point of light moving north in the sky, and since it didn't disappear as quick as I thought it would, I pointed it out to my dad, who saw it too. This thing was obviously quite high since it was just a point of light and there was no sound from it at all. It had no flashing lights at all, so we figured it wasn't a plane, but we had no idea what it was. Then it got weird. The thing turned around and started moving in the opposite direction, never changing magnitude as you'd expect if it was a plane with a light on it. It started doing turn after turn. Eventually, it moved south, turning and doing lots of movements, and it moved behind some clouds towards the horizon, cementing how far away it was as it poked in and out of the sparse, distant clouds as it moved. We were running late for where we were going, so eventually we left, but this was a good 5 to 10 minutes of this. It didn't do those quick erratic movements you see on UFO reports on TV, just moved very quickly for its apparent altitude and turned a lot. I'm not saying it's aliens, as it's almost certainly not, but I've seen a lot of things in the sky since then, 25 years ago, but nothing unexplainable like this. I have no idea what it could have been. Nothing I've ever seen could have done what I saw this thing do. I don't tell the story often because everyone just shrugs it off like it was nothing or I'm crazy, but my dad saw it too, and he's just as baffled about what it could be as I am. I saw a large, upright walking ape with clearly defined, swinging arms and an upright stance. It was way in back country Montana, and quick cameras/phones weren't a thing yet, so obviously most are skeptical. Usually I get laughed at, and then people tell me it must have been a bear. I always hear the bear explanation, but anyone who has seen a bear walking upright knows that it could never be confused for an ape. I think what throws most people off is that they excuse the notion as pure fantasy straight off, and then when they hear a person they consider to be scientifically and logically minded, me, say something like that, it sounds like they're joking. While I do agree that, despite my own personal experience, I did not believe in Bigfoot before this, more evidence should be found before we put Sasquatch as a new species. I think the public should have more of an open mind about it. Not the first time that legend has become reality, and in pine forests with dense underbrush and trees, something that size could walk 3 meters from you and go unnoticed. I was lucky enough to see it in the open. Edit, addressing some major counter-arguments, because I got in an argument with someone in a different place in this thread. They're too big to be discreet. Thick pine forests, especially the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, are extremely dense. Sighting anything is a bitch there, and something could walk 10 feet away from you and you could not notice. This isn't an exaggeration. This has been documented with human-made trails and animals with tracking devices. They must leave some evidence behind, especially a carcass. I travel and hike in nature a lot. I have only once seen a large animal carcass, which was a caribou carcass in Denali, and then only because a guide led me to it. What struck me most about the carcass was that it had been there for a little over a day, and the thing was almost completely skeletonized, with bones strewn about in an unrecognizable fashion. I've heard about people who have been backpacking for their whole lives who have never even come across a carcass like that. We live in the age of smartphones. How are they undocumented? Harkening back to the only XKCD I disagree with, I don't know what that is. This argument is getting more and more common. What people don't realize is that we do have a lot of smartphone pictures/videos of Bigfoot-like creatures, but smartphone cameras are shittier quality than people realize, especially for wildlife photography, and we also live in an age of another game changer, Photoshop. It's impossible to tell which ones are real, so all are excused as fake. This thread is from 10 years ago. Obviously we have AI now, which makes it even harder. I don't know what we saw, and I'm reluctant to talk about it, but screw it. I need to tell this story to someone outside the group. What I'm about to tell you actually happened, and I'm still freaked out about it 25 years later. Every Friday, a group of us would get together to play board games at Jay's house. I'm changing the names of my friends. Jay lived with her parents and her older brother who was never home. There were 9 of us present and playing Pictionary. We were having fun when Jay's dad came storming in. He was typically the coolest guy I knew, kind and soft-spoken with a heart like no one else. The last 2 months he'd been changing, though. His whole demeanor towards us, his friends, his kids, his work, all of it had become a source of anger for him. I hadn't heard the whole story yet, so I was simply trying to avoid him as much as I could and still have fun at his house. Jay's dad was super pissed about the noise we were making and told us to quiet it down. His wife was playing the game with us, and when she spoke back to him about his unreasonable approach, he struck her right in front of all of us. She fell on the floor and we were all dumbstruck. Jay's dad was not a hitter. I'd been to their house so often, mostly to hang with Jay, and I'd never witnessed any domestic violence or seen a single bruise from someone getting slapped or hit. Jay's dad turned to Jay's best girlfriend, and when he spun to face her, we all saw it. It was deep blue, like nearly purple, like water at night. It was rounded like a tick body, and I'd estimate 9 inches across, a foot high, and attached to his back like a leech. I can't describe its body more than that. It was attached to his back along his spine, over his shirt and directly between his shoulder blades. Jay reached out her hand, she was standing by him now, and asked her dad what was on his back. Despite all the noise happening with his tirade, he stopped. He stood up, looked at her, and she walked towards him. In retelling this story, she said she was trying to touch it. This thing, whatever it was, detached from his back, and I swear it just floated there for a moment. Jay's dad was dumbfounded. He stood like he was comatose. Jay put her hand out towards it again, and her mom grabbed her. We all stared at it for a second, watching this watery, tick-like body floating in the middle of the living room. It was only a second or less, to be clear. We've all talked about what happened next, and it's still the scariest thing I've ever experienced, but I'll try and describe it the best I can. The deep blue spot didn't make a sound. It seemed to rob the room of sound, meaning it got quiet, but quiet with white noise, if that makes sense. It got smaller and farther away at the same time without moving from where it was. Does that make sense? It diminished. There was no popping sound or anything when it left, but the air felt less heavy. Jay's dad collapsed. 2 days later, Jay's dad got a blood clot in his brain and died. Jay to this day thinks it was some sort of supernatural force. Jay had a severe medical problem that had self-corrected some months back. When they were cleaning out her dad's stuff, they found a bunch of crazy stuff dealing with the occult. She wouldn't go into much detail about it, and they threw it all away, burnt all they found. She thinks her dad traded his soul for her health. I don't know what happened, and after seeing that, I'm open to many interpretations of what it could have been. I really hope it wasn't what Jay seems to think it was. Her dad was too cool of a guy to go like he did, so suddenly. So maybe he did. I don't know. I've never heard of anyone other than our circle seeing anything like this before, and part of me really hopes it's just our imagination playing up an event like people seeing a weather balloon and convincing each other it was an alien spaceship, but I can't unsee that thing. It was there, and then it was gone, and my friend's dad died 2 days later. And oh shit, while I was typing this out on my phone, my friend Jay's mom just hit me up on Messenger. I haven't spoken with her in at least 10 years. Okay, I'm gonna post this before I lose my nerve. Edit. Grammar errors, and to clarify that this thing was only floating in front of us for a blink.